They have chosen to abuse us, to leave us behind and out here injured while their CEOs and shareholders get rich on our backs. They don't care about us. But guess what? They're not out here. Out here, it's just us. And we've got each other. And today, we finally have a way to force them to stop and listen.
We're ready to go.
All right. Good evening and good afternoon. Good afternoon to our friends and participants from the States, and good evening to all the people here. My name is Uri. I'm the festival director for Utopia, and we're entering the second stage of the Utopia Festival. We were happy to answer a lot of calls and a lot of requests, and we're able to kind of figure out what to do with this lockdown 3.5, lockdown 4. I'm not sure anymore. And as dystopia, darkness, and horror are raging outside, we're happy to bring in a few interesting ideas and utopias to you during these times. And we're starting off our new segment with discussing the films with, we're happy to say, some of the filmmakers that were really kind to allow some time and join us. We've not had a proper opening and closing titles. We've dispensed with a lot of pleasantries and a lot of Kasim, help me out, guys.
Ceremonies
that have to do with festivals that occur in physical location. But the first conversation we had on the first night of Utopia was about Lapsis. So we've done these informal talks about films, got together people that are relevant for a certain film. So some of the people that have talked about Lapsis, one is already with us, Eli Cook, who's a historian of American capitalism. And he had a really interesting take on the film, or takes. Hi, Eli.
Hey,
I have this written down. Dr. Eli Cook is a historian of American capitalism. The book he's writing right now is about neoliberalism and choice architecture, and on mechanisms of control that through menus and choices offer what seems like freedom, never feel like coercion, but they are.
Excellent.
And Lior Zalmanson, who's an old friend, has just joined us as well, and there he is. Lior also had seen your film and had been part of that earlier discussion we had. Lior, he's a researcher and artistic director and an artist. His research is into how users follow online websites and platforms, rules and regulations, and how engagement changes when websites and platforms change the regulation. That was like what brought him to the field, I guess. And recently he's been specifically researching actual gig workers and their relationship to their algorithmic bosses. And as a playwright and a screenwriter, he created a few pieces that handle exactly that. A short film that premiered at Utopia called Operator, and more importantly, internationally premiered at Tribeca, about Kilodrone freelance operators, and a play co-created and starring my girlfriend, Maya Magnat, about content moderators. So you're in good hands. And Noah, I'm going to read this out loud. Hutton is a writer and director of documentary and narrative films. I think we'll be interested with your documentary work as well for the coming up Utopia festivals. Wrote and directed the sci-fi feature Lapsis, which premiered in the narrative feature competition at South by Southwest 2020. He also completed In Silico this year, a 10-year documentary project. He started in 2009 with the support by Sandbox Films and the Sloan Foundation. And it's about a 10-year project trying to simulate the human brain on supercomputers. I'm going to leave it at that. There are a lot of interesting questions. And Amir, take it away.
Okay. So just like one more detail that is important for me and maybe for Noah as well, I was fortunate enough to teach 2 years at Wesleyan University, and apparently Noah is a proud graduate, one of many graduates of this amazing school. So yeah, here's another thing. Somehow it's more important for Americans than Israelis. Like with Israelis, you don't say, "Oh, I was going to Tel Aviv University and you as well." Like, you know, we have a camaraderie, but like since moving to the US, I noticed that it's a big thing for Americans, like, you know, their alma mater. So here we are. So I have to say, like, I had to watch Lapsis twice when I was trying, you know, to program it for my festival. This is the first time that I watched it. And I felt that it was, in a way, it's like, it's really complex in a good way. This is why I felt I need to watch it again. So I think that it would be a good way to start, if you will be kind enough to give us your version of the story. What are we seeing here? You know, in a nutshell. But for, you know, for people who maybe watched it only once or maybe want to watch it, you know, so give us a sense of really what were you aiming for in this film.
So a bit of a summary, a little bit of the story without giving anything away. Yes. Okay. Well, I would say that this film takes place in what I like to call a parallel present. It's not necessarily the future. And in fact, I think people will who have already seen it or who will see it will notice that a lot of the sort of production design, the aesthetics of the film are actually kind of retro and a little worn out and dirty. And it's meant to feel like it could be today or could also be slightly behind us in time. But the fictional world of the film imagines a reality where quantum computing has arrived. And I think we've all heard murmurs that the quantum is around the corner. And one of the things I learned about quantum technology, I don't profess to be an expert, but I did some research before writing the film, was that it does require a different sort of infrastructure. It will require new cabling. And so quantum computers need a new type of fiber optic cable to connect them. And so if we are to run the internet on quantum computers, we will need a new infrastructure for that internet. So that was a little bit of a spark of an idea. But the world of Lapsis imagines the quantum boom has happened, it's here. And so that sort of boom meeting up with what's already here, which is the gig economy, it imagines a world where there's sort of a new sector of the gig economy that has to deal with connecting up this part of quantum computing that's dealing with high-speed trading. So many people probably know about high-speed trading today that Wall Street, you know, runs on, and a lot of it is about the distance between the terminals and themselves. If they're closer, the trades happen faster. So that kind of geography, the economic geographies that would be opened up by this boom in quantum computing was the impetus for this gig economy to just get people out there and start cabling. And so our character, Ray, the main character of Lapsis, needs to support his younger brother who lives with him, who's sort of suffering from a mysterious ailment that is called omnia in the film. It has a lot to do with sort of chronic fatigue disorder, but maybe more all-encompassing. And Ray has to go out and find a quick way to earn money. So he takes up a hand in this new sector of the gig economy. He gets out into the forest, he starts cabling, and soon he realizes that the kind of medallion, the trail name that he was given might not be new for him. It might have belonged to someone else, and there's some sort of mystery around his trail name, his medallion. So one thing leads to another. He finds himself competing with automated carts and he gets wrapped up in this sort of case of mistaken identity that sort of thrusts us into what the film is really about, which is ultimately a story of sort of economic exploitation, and the answer to that being collective action from a working class where this technological boom has really trickled down to effect. So I was more interested in ultimately in that than the sort of what I like to call the white collar science fiction that we see so much today, which is sort of dealing with the people who create technology and benefit from it directly. I think Lapsis is a film that assumes all of that, but looks more at the things that actually do trickle down economically, which are oppressions of the working class.
Okay, so let's talk about the seeds of this idea, which is kind of, again, it's not a typical film. It's like it does combine, science fiction with a lot with a lot of realistic natural world. I think that we can talk about a lot of ideas that kind of meet in this movie. But this was your first full-length feature, and so I was wondering, like, how did like you even start, like, thinking about this, like, kind of mind-boggling idea in a way, sitting and with your computer and starting to work on it? Like, what were the ideas that that drove you into doing this film, and the imagination part as well?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a little mysterious where things come from. It doesn't come from one place. It sort of collects. I think looking back, the world of this film really comes from a little bit of a seed of an idea based in reality, which I was talking about before. The idea that quantum computing requires new infrastructure. That was just sort of the one thing to grab onto. But this world, it does have a degree of absurdism. I'm not saying that this is realism pulled from what's around the corner. I don't know that this is not. I'm not saying this is coming. I think there is a bit of a parable and maybe a satire going on here about forces that are here today. And so, while I did grab at one element of reality, which is the new infrastructure needed for quantum computing, much of this was inspired by elements we're seeing around our world today in the gig economy. So that's part of it, but it's not just the gig economy for me. It's also freelance labor and independent contracting writ large. That's how I've labored the last decade as a freelancer. And so much of that was just related to my own experience as an independent contractor, and a way in which I felt myself toiling endlessly and not really getting anywhere, and no healthcare, et cetera. It's all that stuff. I'm sure everyone's very familiar with that. And then there are sort of academic ideas too that came in. I read an article called an essay called Logic and Fiction by the artist and professor Patricia Reed. And it was in this volume called, I have it right here, The Psychopathologies of Cognitive Capitalism. This was very important to me, this book. And I was very inspired by Patricia Reed's idea that much of the financial world, the financial logics that run our world, are in fact incredibly abstract fiction that we've all blended this amazing reality to, that we sort of just accept as the ground truth of our world. But derivatives and high-speed trading and mortgage swaps and all these things are incredibly absurdist fiction, actually, that's been written for us as reality. And so that was sort of felt like a very creatively rich space to start from, and imagine a new sort of absurdist fiction of financial logic that a world is running on. And then the last thing I'll say is that, you mentioned in the introduction, you mentioned that documentary about neuroscience, and I've been very embedded in this world of the brain and neuroscience for many years now. And so I think there's an element of the world of Lapsis that maybe feels a little bit neurological, and the rewiring of this world, the constant sort of like making of new connections and responding to some global force. And so that, on a very abstract level, I think that sort of maybe was a guiding principle for the structure of the world.
Yeah, well, you actually answered my next question, because I was interested in, because I didn't see in silico. Like, I don't think that there's a lot of lucky people that saw it yet. Hopefully, I don't know, not next South by, the next, in 2022 maybe, when we can meet in person. But but yeah, like it's for me, like, you know, when I saw the trailer and read about In Silico, it seemed that there's like some weird connection, as you said, an abstract connection between, you know, the way that we wire the world with like metal synapses, or and on the other hand, you know, our brain connects, you know, through all those weird connection that. So you basically said it, but if like maybe a little bit like more focused on that, was that an idea, or you know what, in general, even like, do you feel like personally that you're attracted to, you know, to these two themes that are basically combined? Like, because, you know, you have two features and you basically, you have like some kind of an abstract idea that connects them.
Yeah, no, I think that's, this idea came out of a project I did in 2014 for Times Square here in New York. There's this thing in Times Square where they allow artists to sort of take over all the billboards every night for a month for 3 minutes, and you get to show something. And so I was asked to create something for that in 2014, and I came up with this project called Brain City, and basically it was imagery from my documentary of the brain on the billboards, but in conjunction with that, we built a website that basically mapped all locations in New York City on Yelp to locations of the brain. And it was a two-way website. So you could explore the brain and click on different regions, and it would bring you to somewhere in New York City, an analogous structure in New York City. And then vice versa, you could navigate through the city structures and be brought to an analogous structure of the brain. It was sort of like a mapping of the grid of a city onto a brain. And that was just sort of a fun website for people to explore the idea further. But
I'm interjecting, and I'm gonna ask about that project. Did it map like certain areas of the brain that have to do with, I don't know, language or motor skills or vision to relevant areas in New York City?
Yeah, so like, for example, I remember the Bowery Poetry Club was mapped onto Broca's area of the brain, which deals with language, for example, you know. And these are like, obviously, these are just fun sort of metaphorical connections. There's not, but it was a fun way to explore the city through the metaphors of neurology. But I would say that on a more like political level, what that got me thinking. So there were some that had a little more of a political commentary too. Like you could click on the city side, capitalism or something. There were larger concepts of the city, and then you could be brought to a brain concept like the default mode network, which is a network of brain structures that's always on, even when we're at rest. And so there, you know, that got me playing a little more with political mappings of the brain and our world. And so that also that relates back to this book that I was talking about before. This is very much a book about the sort of politics of neurology and neuroscience. And so I think in Lapsis, like, I'm very much interested in politicizing the way in which where we talk about the brain and the way in which we talk about the average normal brain. And that's something my documentary is about. So I don't know, you know, these things that end up just sort of trickling in when you're interested about them in different ways.
Okay, so as a screenwriter who works on the story, and you know, I noticed that there's like kind of an interesting meeting point between the technological and you know, the HR, you know, policies and all that, and the personal, because we do meet and we have intimate you know, a knowledge of your characters, of your you know, your protagonist and people that he meets. In a way, it's like, you know, I don't know if you saw Nomadland, but it's a way, like, in a way, he goes and he works, but he meets all kind of other nomads that you know, doing the same thing, but you know, they share experiences. You know, he has, like, you know, all kinds of anecdotes. So as a filmmaker, as a screenwriter who works on that, how do you blend that and you find the balance between the personal experience and the political messaging, the technological you know, topography of the film?
I won't profess to know how to do that. I just will say that it's very difficult to figure out the balance there. Something I was thinking about very often in making this was I'm not so interested in making films that are just sort of slice of life portraits. Maybe people have been calling this neorealism recently in independent cinema. And I guess maybe it's because I come from documentary. I don't know what it is, but I think there are also documentary filmmakers who end up making very slice of life type fiction films. I guess in this film, something that was like an anchor for me to always come back to was the idea that the audience's experience of this world was coming through Ray, our main character. And so I never wanted us to get ahead of him in terms of what we understood technologically about the world, or rather, more importantly, get behind him. So there are many films where you feel like the main character you're watching knows more about the science or technology of this world, like has figured it out, and you're kind of watching them figure it out, but you don't really know anything as an audience more than they do. So I tried to just keep the audience with Ray, and he's an everyman. He comes into this world not knowing much about the tech or anything, or the politics, So I felt like also in meeting other cablers, like you say, the anecdotes and the stories, he starts to learn about this world. We can maybe feel him get aligned a little bit over the course of the film with a more active political movement that's already going on out there. And so he was kind of a vessel to try to hold on to what you're saying, which is that elusive like middle ground about teasing in ideas, but keeping it personal.
Okay. Another angle for Lapsis, which I found like kind of interesting. It's not in the front, but I thought it was there. It's definitely there. Is more about like the surroundings, like the natural surroundings, and the way that it's being invaded by those, this big box of the quantum, which was, by the way, I feel like it's really like a Kubrick aesthetics. Was it like, you thought about something like that, or was it my imagination, like looking at this big box and think, oh, this is like a monolithic symbol from the future? That's my take. But anyways, the way that technology with all those like cables and everything, that the way that they invaded and nature, which is so beautiful, like this whole, everything is in the green, everything is like it's a park or so. Do you think about aesthetically and also thematically about that, the way the contrast here?
Yeah, the cables were meant to feel like a really sort of strange oversight in a way, like, oh, we're going to just lay these cables over the ground, and it just sort of meant to feel like an almost the way in which booms feel like a lot of the time. Like I made a couple documentaries about oil booms here in the U.S. and there are many just going around the oil fields. There's just so much that happens so fast. Things get discarded. There's sort of debris everywhere, and it always felt to me like there are elements of this that go completely unregulated and can just sort of happen in a very dirty way because the economic forces are so much stronger that are pulling it from the future towards where it wants the boom to go. And so I was thinking about how the messiness is okay, and how in fact all of the tech that's out there in the forest, these kiosks, the cubes, should all feel like they're kind of getting beat up and aged a little bit, and there's like moss growing on them and stuff. And maybe there wasn't too much thought put into how long these structures could actually exist out in the environment. So, and then we were always trying to look out for little creatures and animals and insects that we could find and show that this world is kind of being taken over by life a little bit. So absolutely.
Okay. So just a little bit about you said of the political part and the class issues. So one interesting thing that you see sometimes in film that touch this subject, but it's in a way it's like it's interesting how competition kind of corrupts the spirit of the simple worker, right? Of the gig worker. It's not only like a class issue of us against them, or even us against the robots or against the machines, but the competition that is instilled in this whole culture of this company creates like real, like sometimes hostility and animosity and some treacherous acts toward each other. So tell us a little bit about that part of the story.
I think that's you've touched on the sort of dark genius of our economic times, which is that it renders the individual, this autonomous unit where you begin to absorb the same logic as a company yourself, in that you buy your own equipment, and you're given this sense that what you're sold is the idea that you've achieved freedom as a laborer, right? But in reality, by being completely cut off from the rest of the world, you've lost all sense of connection to a collective that could be leveraged to gain yourself more, of a safety net or any kind of basic protection. So, this is something for our hero Ray. It feeds right into his sort of American pick myself up by my bootstraps individualism, and I was interested because I think I have a little bit of that inside of me too. I think I maybe was even more like that when I was younger. Some people get more conservative as they get older. I've sort of been the opposite. I'm trending in the other direction, but I definitely remember that feeling, like coming out of college and just feeling like an individual I was so excited to be a freelancer and start, my own LLC. And it felt great, And so I had that inside of me, but I also wanted to bring that force in and meet that with someone like the character of Anna, who has already been part of this sort of movement going on in the woods to get people to come together and fight together. And so to have those two people talking was interesting to me, to see where that conversation could move. And people might feel obviously connected to one side of that conversation, but I think for a lot of people, it's very complex. They have elements of both inside of themselves.
Okay, it was interesting that the machines their all goal is to create competition more than actually do the work. So that was interesting. Okay, so 2 more quick questions, and then Ori will.
1 second. What Amir just said is something that was one of the important points that we kind of delved into in the previous conversation we had about the film, and I'd really love to hear Noah speak a little bit to it, because I just listened to the conversation we had. Actually, it's in English, so you can as well. I said in that previous conversation that I think that the mission statement for the robotics department for that the quantum cabling technology conglomeration was to create robots that will push the human labor as hard as possible. Nothing to do with actually laying out cable. Is that something is that how you saw it as well?
Yeah, if we could write that mission statement, you've already cracked it. These robots were purposefully designed to not seem capable of completing a route themselves. They seem kind of slow, actually. They don't seem like they could get over water or through brush, and that's all quite on purpose, because as you've picked up on, their primary purpose is to push the humans to their limits.
Okay, so before Uri will start moderating the question from the audience. So it's not a spoiler because it's in the beginning of the film, but you mentioned there, like, you talk about the Jewish holidays. You mentioned Shavuot. Where did that come from?
Oh, good. This is the first time I got to answer this question. No one has even mentioned this or picked up on this. This is fantastic.
You probably don't know what it is. So.
Well, it might be deceptive because of my last name Hutton, but I'm a big Jew, and I was raised by a Jewish mother, and so it just comes from me. I can't. You know what? It really comes from like the struggle of alternate side parking in New York City, and the constantly shifting holiday calendar that sometimes bail me out. And so I feel like one time struggling to find to move my car, I was bailed out by Shavuot one time, and I think that stuck.
Okay, that's nice. So this is very realistic. Okay, so now my last question, and this is where maybe the journalist in me comes out. So you mentioned your mom, and who is Deborah Winger, a famous actress, and your father is Timothy Hutton, which was really also an amazing actor. Both were in their prime in the 80s, right?
Yes.
But lots of films like Timothy Hutton starred in Ordinary People and The Falcon and the Snowman, and Deborah Winger in Shelter in Sky and Officer and a Gentleman, or the other way around. Yeah, with Richard Gere. Yeah. So your outbringing is basically, it's like by filmmakers. And so I wonder, what contribution did your outbringing, had for your career and going out there as an independent filmmaker? And what do your folks think about the thing that you do? It's very different.
Yeah, well, I started more in documentary. It was pretty far from the world that I grew up in and what they do. They were very supportive the whole time. I always did want to come back to make fiction films. I grew up really on sets because both my parents were actors. I didn't actually go to school until I was like 10 or 11. So I was like tutored on sets. I was really, because they were still in the like primes of their careers. So we were really like a military family moving all around the place. And so I felt like the world of a set was actually like home and wasn't this crazy place, but actually was like very very sensible to me. And I think in that way it was kind of inevitable to continue to want to live on sets as an adult and get back to that world. I love the collective feeling on a set of kind of working a sort of mad energy to work towards a shared goal. It's very intoxicating, especially in a world where we all can fall into our little bubbles of freelancing and I don't know when it'll be possible for independent films to happen as frequently as they were. I like now with 30% having to be built into budgets to deal with COVID, it's tough to get these level of films off the ground. We couldn't have made Lapsis like this coming summer, or even of course last summer. So we're very lucky to have, anyway, but that's, I'm away from your question now about my parents, my actor parents. And so they're quite supportive now, especially getting back to fiction, feature filmmaking for me. They both came and visited set there. I would ask them questions about directors they've worked with and how they have liked and disliked the ways in which directors have worked with them as actors. And so having that insight is very lucky for me. They're both incredibly smart and have so much experience. Maybe one day I'll put them in a film. I don't know. I wanted to kind of go out and make my own film first, I think, without them. But maybe someday. And then my stepfather, who's Arliss Howard, who's married to Deborah Winger, my mother. Maybe people saw him in Mank. If you've seen Mank, he plays Louis B. Mayer, the head of the studio. And
just saw him in The Day After.
Okay, yeah. So he's in the film briefly. So he plays the doctor. Anyway, so.
Okay, great. This is where Uri takes over, and with the question from the audience. but it was a pleasure. No, hopefully I'll meet you in person in New York.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for being the early scout of the film, and I really appreciate it. Hope to meet you.
Yeah. Next time I'll bring you to my festival.
Great.
Close to home.
Well, you have two festivals, Amir. you have the one you started at, and you have your own now.
Right.
But yeah,
that's my outbringing.
There's no competition. I have one question for you, Noah. And just give us the raw details, maybe, because we've not touched on it. Some production issues, like because it's a very contemporary film. I mean, it's an issue that's been going on for the past decade or past 5, 6, 7 years. The issue of gig workers, but you've also had Prop 22 in California this past year, and it's a very contemporary film. When did the film originate? I mean, when did you start writing? When was the first page written? When was it, finished and you started, looking for financing? And when was it shot and done?
Yeah, I think looking back, I came up with the idea summer of 2017. I think I wrote it that fall and winter, so fall 2017 into 2018. And then it took us about a year to raise money as I was continued to do new drafts and stuff, and get up to like draft 30 or whatever we ended up on. And so by the spring of 2019, we sort of had enough wind in our sails. We had about a third of the budget committed, where we could and you have to kind of hedge a little bit making a film at this scale. It's near impossible to get all the money up front all at once, but there are things like tax credits and stuff that you can use to get loans, and I sort of learned about all this as I went. But by the spring of 2019, we were gearing into pre-production, and we shot the film for 4 weeks in the summer of 2019, and it was a 26-day shoot, and we did about 3 weeks in the forest world, and then 1 week in Queens.
Okay, so really recent. I mean, it's
fairly recent. Yeah.
Okay, so a few audience questions. Let's please start with Carmel. Carmel, unmute yourself. I'm just gonna say, Dr. Carmel Vaisman, another long-time collaborator with the festival. She teaches and researches digital culture, digital society. Go ahead.
Hi. So first of all, Noah, thank you for this film. I really, really enjoyed it. It's a really smart film. It's the kind of film you want to show the students in order to discuss about. I wanted to ask you a question about the ending of the movie. And I'm going to thread carefully here, not to spoil it. I'm not going to talk about what we saw in this last scene, but it made me think afterwards if I even understood the ending and if it's changed what I thought you were saying in the movie. So suddenly at the end, we have a different protagonist, perhaps, or someone else to blame.
Carmen. I'll interject and I'll say, Amir has done a wonderful job at not allowing for any spoilers or not spoiling anything yet, as Noah has done. The conversation is meant for people who have seen the film. We're in the cinema. The credits have rolled, and we're here with Noah to discuss the film. Now that I've said that, it's nice that we've done that spoiler alert. So let's say, for the sake of your question, I'm gonna warn listeners that there may be spoilers ahead.
I'm gonna try not to. I'm not saying anything about it. I will in fact ask it a different way. There's another protagonist, or it seemed like a supporting character, or stand-in character that suddenly may have a role that I wanted to ask about. that couple that was renting both to the robotic workers and to the workers, right? There was a couple there that represented a different status. We've only talked about, I mean, so far about the big companies that are and the people who are doing the gig economy. But what is that status of those people who sit in their houses and rent to all kind of workers? You know, what were you trying to say about those people? Who are they in reality? Like, what do they represent?
You've kind of answered it already, though, because I think you know too. But they are the in between. They are the landlord class. They are the renters, and so when we see our hero come in to that garage and you know, that's where these people are profiting off of this kind of one element of the gig economy, which is a way in which people rent parts of their private homes to store gear. So fine, we see that. He asks a basic, you know, on a human level, he just asks if he can charge his phone. They say no. That's not part of the whole racket, and they in fact probably just have their own policy that they don't let people charge their phones here. They want to get them out of there as quick as possible. And then, you know, later, so I don't know, I'm confused now a little bit about how much I should give away or not, but I'll say that what happens at the end then is really meant to point a finger at a new population that the movie has not dealt with and say, actually, even though this might have happened out in the woods, this collective action that we've just seen, this is the vanguard of real change. It's going to be people like this who have to pick which side they're on, and that's all.
This is for the sequel.
Yeah. I don't know about that.
No, because it's really important. I thought maybe, you know, at the end you're pointing a finger and saying they are to blame. They are the real people who are profiting off of anything that would happen, right? Because the workers are vulnerable and the big companies are vulnerable, but they would profit anyway. That's how I thought you were putting this. This is why I wondered, how are you seeing these people?
Oh yeah, well I don't know. I don't know that the big companies are vulnerable. I don't know that the film suggests that. I mean, they're certainly vulnerable to collective action briefly, but I don't know that they have actually much long-term at stake. But the film definitely points to these types of people, safe people who are profiting, who are sort of taking their piece of the pie and you know, don't have much investment in picking a side, it seems, in terms of a labor struggle like this. But in order to like build the kind of coalition that would actually have to be able to take down or change on a systemic level, you would need these people on your side. And so the story kind of brings us to them to say that at the end.
Thank you.
Ellie, do you want to insert a question, or do you want to comment, or both?
Hi, Noah. So two questions, one short question, one long question. Did Ray vote for Trump? Is the short question. Because I said he did. I said he did. I thought it was very important to the movie that this is clearly a Trump voter, but I got some pushback, so I want to know. And then my second question is, what I really liked about the movie was that while this cabling was fucked up, it wasn't that fucked up. And I wanted to know, what do you think is actually more fucked up and more demeaning and more exploitative, this or Uber? Because what I was thinking is that what this doesn't have is that in Uber, you also have a kind of the tyranny of the 5-star rating where, you know, you're constantly having, you know, to suck up to these fucking clients, and the car needs to smell good and you need to be like, you know, happy all the time. And where here, I felt like you're more competing against the robots and not so much against the other people. And you're kind of outside, you're camping. So I was just wondering, like, what would you rather do? Would you rather cable or would you rather Uber? Those are my questions.
Good. So first question, I honestly did not consider who Ray voted for in writing the character. But in fact,
Noah, it's a parallel universe. You can just say
that's exactly right. And that's my out. You know, I'm going to take that as an out. We're in a parallel present. This was not the same election that we all saw. Ray might have been more of like a Romney voter than a Trump voter. I don't know. Maybe he's a Trump voter, but you know, I think either he's a Trump voter or he's a non-voter. I would say he's probably, you know, maybe he's a Biden voter now. I don't know. That actually makes some kind of sense. He's like a lunch pail Biden voter. Okay. Anyway, the second part of your question, or the second question, is really interesting. Yes, I think that Uber has a different type of oppression that cabling doesn't have, the 5-star rating oppression. Cabling has the other thing though of physical, a lot of threat to the body. Certainly driving a car is not necessarily super safe, but I would say that cabling is, you know, part of that is the peril of pulling heavy equipment through a landscape.
But Noah,
getting injured.
But Noah, it's in nature. It's good for you. You're hiking.
That is the upside. You do get to camp. I just don't think that people are really having a nice time cabling in terms of thinking of it as a camping weekend. I mean, maybe, but the rating thing, you're right on. The oppression of the rating system is not something in cabling. So I personally would rather cable, but I'm also an able-bodied young man.
Me too. I would rather cable.
Yeah.
We have a question from Tzippi Fisher. She wrote on the chat. I'm gonna kind of embellish on it. She'd like to know more about the brother's illness and why does the woman say it isn't real, and why are the cures so weird? And that when I saw the film, and I saw it a few times, it kind of, a lot of things resonated with me. One is the peculiar illnesses that have been propping up in relation, maybe or not, and maybe they're only psychological, that have to do with radiation, cellular radiation. And I thought maybe you're commenting on that, so let's answer Tzippi's question. What's this illness and why is it weird, and is it real or not, and so forth?
Yeah, well, so I have a family member who had Lyme disease, had chronic Lyme, and has chronic Lyme disease, and so that was what got me started to think about this, because in talking with him, I guess there's just a lot of people out there who doubt people who say that they have chronic Lyme disease, or who think that this is something that this is like a lot of diseases rolled into one, or different things rolled into the banner of Lyme disease. So that's not just exclusive of Lyme disease. There's a wonderful documentary a couple years ago about CFS, chronic disease syndrome, chronic fatigue syndrome, which is another syndrome that people doubt a lot when people profess to have these kind of fatigue disorders. There's a lot of skepticism about the psychosomatic quality of that. Is it real or not? So I was thinking about that as a kind of background, but really it's I think what it's talking about is this sort of incredibly complicated multivalence of modern illness and disorder and developmental disorders, where I mean, it's like every week there's new articles about microplastics, things in the air, things in the water, things in the food you eat, GMOs, and it's becoming so complicated to tease apart the causality of many diseases and disorders that Omnia was sort of it is intentionally vague and intentionally disputed inside of this world. People think it's fake, and intentionally something that seems to help this one person's manifestation of Omnia in the film, drinking this tea that he gets from this very expensive boutique near the end of the film, that there's truth, there might be truth to that. I think, and that part of this is there are different treatment strategies needed for different individuals. These diseases, because of the complexity of their causality, the complexity of treatment needs to reflect that. So it's also a comment a little bit on the extreme income inequalities reflected in many of our best homeopathies and these companies like Goop that have sort of co-opted this wellness world. anyway, those were sort of all of the factors rolling into this.
That's fantastic. One of the things we touched on the early conversation is the tea and that illness, and what sort of metaphors are they, and what do they represent? One of the things that another participant said, and I actually wrote it down, it's like you get the feeling that we live in a world of made up things, of scam, of constant scam. And it also kind of resonates for me with what you said, and like a lot of the cablers, you have this segment there when they talk about cabling and the cable company around a third of the way in, I think. And they have all these conspiracy theories, and they have a lot of anti-science lingo, and it's kind of reflective of what they're still cabling, they're still doing the corporation's work, but they don't think it's there. They don't believe it. They think it's a scam, whatever. And Boaz Levi, who's on our board, who's on the Utopia board, and he's a playwright and screenwriter, and he's an awesome guy, and he has a question, and the question is, well, Boaz, ask your question.
Hi, Noah. Thank you for joining us, and it's really a thought-provoking film. I enjoyed it. And one question for you, you talked about researching all the science behind these things, the quantum revolution and all of that. But still, I had the feeling watching the film that it might be also like a kind of a Ponzi thing. I was wondering if you actually, and some of the characters maybe are feeling the same about it. Is it real? Is there anything behind it? Is there really, some kind of a quantum thing going on, or is it all like a big nothing? It's some like, a pyramid thing where everybody is hiring other people to do their, stuff or something like this, because it's something that you don't really answer. And I was wondering about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that this really, where this came from is something I was talking about earlier, which is this idea of things in our world that were exposed in the 2008 financial crisis, for example, that were extreme fictions that we all sort of accepted as truth, and then moved on from, and bailed out those banks and sort of allowed them to continue writing this fictional world we live in. So I think the way that feels to you, the way that quantum feels in the world of that world, that's the way that Wall Street feels to me today. So I could poke at like derivative swapping and tell you that it's not real, because it really isn't. And quantitative easing, the Fed just sort of like, pushing money into banks. And so that there are incredible fictions all around us that we absorb every day. So I think that feeling that you have is intentional, and poking at it would probably reveal that there is a bit of a Ponzi scheme going on here, and that it is a world of scamming, as we were just talking about. Certainly the like hiring people to do the work for you, that that's like age immemorial, though. That's not necessarily unique to this era we live in. But I think you're absolutely onto that sensation of fiction that was important to this world.
And I gotta add, we've not addressed this, but that type of world in which we do live in, and that has a lot of scams, and it's hard. It's increasingly hard to understand and know what's actually happening, and what the truth is, can get people into conspiratorial states of mind that have at their, when radicalized, disastrous results. And we've not said this, but we all feel for the US right now, and we've all had a very bad week. I have had a very bad week And much of it is because of constantly seeing news from the US, constantly being fed news from the US, constantly reading and watching things that are happening. So, but not to go into that. So, but I did want to address that. We're coming to, I mean, you've allowed us a certain amount of time. We have maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Is that okay?
Yeah. I have a few minutes, but I can be a little late.
So
yeah.
we're not going to make you late. Amir, go ahead. Amir, our interviewer, had a question, and then Lior Zalmanson is going to be our final question.
Okay.
So this time as an audience member. So next project, you're going to try and look for investors, and you're going to show them Lapsis. And
Oy
first
vey!
of all, oy vey. Making this film, criticizing basically the capitalist current system. And you probably know that the financing system, especially of indie films, is also very dubious and have a lot of the things that you talk about in this film also works there behind the scenes. Isn't it dangerous, to do this kind of film and actually thinking about like a future as an independent filmmaker?
That's a good question. The way I'll answer it is that on some level, yes, of course it is. I can't really make my film in relation to how I hope to secure the money for the next one, though. So all I'll say is that I actually think that for someone like me, who and I come from a tremendous position of privilege. I have, famous parents who are fairly wealthy. I grew up going to private schools. I had all of this privilege, and so if there's anyone, like I should be the one to if this is really a risk to make this film, it should be I should do it because I have a tremendous cushion to fall on. So I don't think that I'm risking. I am risking something, but I just want to acknowledge that I'm not risking everything. I also, I freelance as a commercial editor. I have a way to make a living outside of whether this film succeeds or not. But if I am going to put my name on a film and put it out in the world, it has to speak to what I truly believe in and what I want to see different about the world I live in. So I had to make this film, and the next one won't. If you see that the next one is neutered of critique, you should let me know, because I intend to keep making films with this attitude.
Right.
Even if if the next film gets like bought by Amazon, I'm going to be compromised. We'll see.
Okay, great. Good luck for getting finance.
I think the capitalist system is well organized to kind of engulf its own critique into its mouth. But yeah.
Also, upstate New York, you get 40%, right? 40% back.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If we keep making films here in upstate New York, we just have to raise 60% of the budget, and then we're there. So there's a method to the madness. And yes, absolutely. If there's anything I've learned too, it's that people who you're critiquing love to pretend like your film is critiquing everyone except for them. So maybe this film fits right into capitalism. I bet Eli could speak more to that.
Leo.
Hey, yes. So I'm joining the praise, and it's a great film. And as a researcher who's been focusing on Uber for the last 4 years, I want to just share and sort of also piggyback on what Eli said. He talked about the 5-star reviews, but actually the main difference that I found between the cablers and the Uber people, the Uber drivers, is that the cablers at least have some sort of socialization. It is a social profession. They're not totally isolated. And that's also, again, spoiler alert, sort of where some resolution lies, right? Some of the optimism in the film. But I wanted to ask actually a different question. I wanted to actually ask a screenwriting question that sort of relates to that, because it seems like you've done tons of research, tons of scientific research and tons of social research. And a lot of it is very present in the film, which is very impressive because as Carmen said, it is a great film to teach in classes, but it is still a good story. And the question is, as a screenwriter, how do you balance, I guess, all this need to incorporate tons of research and make it, have societal impact, but also then tell a very engaging, heartfelt story? And maybe do you have an example where you had to choose between one or another, or had to find ways to make it work?
I gotta,
Yeah.
I have to, I'll add to that and say that it's like one of the quintessential questions of science fiction writing. Where does the world building stop and research stop and writing and drama begin? And did you do one and then the other, or and when they kind of when there's a conflict, what do you do? So yeah, sorry for piggybacking on your question, Leo, but it's a great question. Noah.
That's a great question. I think in looking back, I think what I did here is that I overwrote my first drafts. They were far too long, and I overwrote the world of the forest. Plenty of little episodes of him meeting other cablers, people talking.
Sorry, Noah. When you say overwrote,
yeah,
is that something a producer or a financier would tell you? Like, what do you mean overwrote?
No, I mean for myself, I wrote a script that was far longer than a feature.
Right. Okay.
So I'm just talking about page count in terms of the running time of a film. I wrote many more scenes than I even ever intended to put into the film, and then it was a process of killing darlings one by one as they didn't relate to the core story. Like any scene that felt too tangential would get sliced, but often what would happen is there would be some piece of that darling that I was about to kill that I couldn't kill, I would souvenir, but it wasn't like the original whole idea of that scene. It was like one line or something. So by writing out each scene in full, an exchange between Ray and another cabler where the other cabler was talking about 5G, conspiracy theories or something, some line there would trickle into some other characters, die. So the sort of like the things that couldn't die stuck around. And it was like, it's like survival of the fittest with what has to stay. And then I would say in the edit, we talked about the sequence before of like these people that he's encountering. It's kind of a montage that ends with the guy playing the saxophone of people having some anti-science feelings. And it's sort of like all these people talking to him. And that's a good example of like, that actually, that was written exactly as appears in the film. That in the final draft of the script, it was that, but it started as a collection of like 7 different scenes between Ray and different people and different episodes, and kept getting like boiled down into, well, what is the essence? What am I trying to say about this world and what people think? And it ended up feeling like this could be a kind of montage to express a general feeling on a gestalt on the whole. So that's one example of that kind of like trickling down of little ideas.
Thank you.
That was perfect. It was well done. I did lie to you. This is a scam, but it's an easy question, I hope. This will be your last question.
Okay.
What are your top 3, and this is a question from the audience, top 3 dystopian movies or that have influenced you, if you want to answer that?
Great. I have to tell the person I'm about to sign on to their Zoom, and then I'm going to answer it.
Okay.
Okay. All right. My top 3 dystopian movies. I think, number 1 for me, and I feel like this is my favorite film of the last decade, is the Lior film, Holy Motors. That's like number 1 for me.
Let's leave it at that. Let's leave it at that.
Let's leave it there. That's the.
Yeah, there's so many, but it's such a an obscure but fabulous film.
Yes.
Noah, thank you so much for your time. We know you have to go, so go. And thank you.
Thank you all so much. Great questions, everybody. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
It was lovely. Thank you.
They have chosen to abuse us, to leave us behind and out here injured while their CEOs and shareholders get rich on our backs. They don't care about us. But guess what? They're not out here. Out here, it's just us. And we've got each other. And today, we finally have a way to force them to stop and listen.
We're ready to go.
Bomb in the cake. Don't worry, I used to be a bomb guy. Stand back!